The sharp blare of a tow truck horn shattered the peaceful morning silence on our quiet suburban street. I raced outside, heart pounding, to find a burly driver hooking up the front end of my neighbor Karen's SUV. "What the?" I shouted, sprinting across the driveway. But the driver only glared at me and revved the engine, the tires of Karen's massive vehicle squealing as it was yanked backwards off my property with a deafening crunch. I stood there, stunned, watching helplessly as the tow truck sped away down the road with Karen's car dangling precariously behind it. Just minutes ago, I'd strolled outside to find her Range Rover blocking the entrance to my garage, preventing me from leaving for work. Furious, I'd stormed over and pounded on her front door, but there was no answer. "Unbelievable," I muttered, pacing back and forth across the driveway. Karen was always pulling inconsiderate stunts like this, acting as if the entire neighborhood existed solely for her convenience. Just last week, she'd reported my son's basketball hoop to the HOA for being unsightly, forcing us to take it down. And the week before that, she'd complained about the color of our front door, threatening legal action if we didn't repaint it immediately. Gritting my teeth, I glanced around to see if any of the other neighbors had witnessed the spectacle. A few curious faces peered out from behind curtains, but no one else had dared to intervene. We all knew better than to cross Karen. She was like the neighborhood tyrant, constantly throwing her weight around and demanding everyone comply with her whims. Well, not this time. I'd had enough of her entitled behavior. Before I could talk myself out of it, I whipped out my phone and quickly called the number for the nearest tow truck company. "Hi, I need to report an illegally parked vehicle blocking my driveway," I explained, providing the address and details. The operator assured me a driver would be dispatched immediately. Sure enough, within minutes the familiar rumble of a tow truck engine filled the air. I watched with grim satisfaction as the burly driver hooked up Karen's SUV and began hauling it away, the tires squealing in protest. Karen's ostentatious vehicle was no match for the powerful truck, which made quick work of relocating it to the impound lot. As the tow truck disappeared down the street, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. After all, Karen was my neighbor, and we always maintained a relatively civil relationship, or at least I had. But now, as I stood alone in my driveway, I knew there would be hell to pay. Karen was not the type to let this slight go unanswered. As if on cue, the front door of Karen's house flew open, and she came storming out, her face twisted in rage. "What have you done?" she shrieked, marching across the driveway towards me. I braced myself, squaring my shoulders. "Your car was blocking my garage," I replied evenly. I had no choice but to call a tow truck. "No choice?" Karen's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "You had no right to have my vehicle impounded. Do you have any idea how much that's going to cost me to get it back?" I shrugged. "You shouldn't have parked it in front of my house in the first place." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. "This is unacceptable. I'm going to make sure you pay for this, both literally and figuratively." "Good luck with that," I scoffed. "You're the one who broke the rules, not me." "We'll see about that," Karen spat, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "Mark my words, you'll regret the day you crossed me." With that, she whirled around and stomped back towards her house, slamming the door with a resounding crash. I'd let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through my hair. Great, now I'd really done it. Karen was known for holding grudges, and I had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning of a long and painful feud. Still, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. For once, someone had stood up to her bullying tactics and won. Maybe this would finally teach her a lesson about respecting her neighbors. As I turned to head back inside, I noticed a few curious onlookers peeking out from behind their curtains. I gave them a brief nod, then headed for the safety of my own home. I had a feeling I'd need to be on high alert for the foreseeable future. The next few days passed in a tense, uneasy silence. I half expected Karen to come storming over at any moment, ready to unleash her wrath. But to my surprise, she never showed up. Instead, I noticed subtle changes in our neighborhood. Little things that at first seemed innocuous enough. The community Facebook group, which Karen had previously dominated with her constant complaints and demands, suddenly fell silent. No more posts about unsightly lawn ornaments or unauthorized driveway repairs. It was as if she had simply vanished from the online sphere. Then there were the whispers. Whenever I stepped outside, the neighbors would quickly avert their gaze or change the subject, as if afraid to be caught talking about the Karen situation. I couldn't help but wonder if she had been going around, spreading rumors or threatening retaliation. The final straw came when I noticed my weekly lawn service had mysteriously stopped showing up. I called the company, only to be told that they no longer service our neighborhood due to unforeseen circumstances. It wasn't hard to guess who was behind that particular development. Frustrated and growing increasingly concerned, I decided to pay Karen a visit. If she wanted a war, then so be it. But I wasn't going to sit idly by and let her terrorize the entire block. I marched up to her front door and rang the bell, steeling myself for another confrontation. When Karen finally answered, her expression was one of barely concealed disdain. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I think you know exactly what I want," I retorted. "This has gone on long enough, Karen. You need to stop harassing the entire neighborhood because of your little tantrum." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't done anything." "Don't play dumb with me," I shot back. "The lawn service, the Facebook group, it's all you're doing, isn't it?" For a moment, Karen's mask of indifference slipped, and I saw a glimmer of triumph in her eyes. "Maybe you should have thought about the consequences before you had my car towed," she said smoothly. "This is ridiculous," I growled. "You can't just bully everyone into submission because you didn't get your way." "Oh, I can," Karen purred. "And I will, until you learn your lesson." With that, she slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing there fuming. I knew then that I was in for a long and bitter fight. Karen was not going to back down, and she had the entire neighborhood cowed into submission. As I trudged back to my house, I couldn't help but wonder what other tricks she had up her sleeve. This was far from over. The following week, things took an even more ominous turn. As I pulled into my driveway after work, I was greeted by a large handwritten sign posted on my front lawn. Entitledparents. Due recentcompilations. Despperty has bendemednidisor and is subgct to hevify. Please remedy immediately or facelegl action. My heart sank as I read the message, instantly recognizing Karen's distinct scrawl. Sure enough, when I looked closer, I could see the telltale logo of the Homeowners Association stamped at the bottom. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, ripping the sign from the ground and storming towards Karen's house. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. I pounded on the door with enough force to rattle the frame, and a few seconds later, it swung open to reveal a smug-looking Karen. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly, as if nothing was amiss. "Cut the crap, Karen," I spat. "This is your doing, isn't it?" Her painted lips curled into a smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "The HOA notice on my lawn," I said, shoving the sign in her face. "Don't play dumb with me. I know you're behind this." Karen feigned innocence. "Well, perhaps if your property didn't look so unkempt, the HOA wouldn't have felt the need to intervene." "Unkempt," I echoed, bewildered. "My lawn is perfectly manicured." That's not what the neighbors say," Karen said, shaking her head. "But I suppose they're just looking out for the neighborhood's best interests." I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to throttle her. This is harassment, pure and simple. And I won't stand for it. Harassment? Karen scoffed. I'm simply exercising my rights as a member of the HOA. If you have a problem with that, I'd be more than happy to take it up with the board. Before I could respond, she slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing there, fuming. I couldn't believe the lengths she was willing to go to get back at me. This was no longer just a petty squabble. It was an all-out war. Gripping the HOA notice tightly in my hand, I turned and stalked back to my house, my mind racing with possible countermoves. If Karen wanted a fight, then that's exactly what she was going to get. Over the next few days, I found myself in an escalating battle of wits with Karen. Every move I made, she seemed to counter it with some new tactic designed to undermine me. First, I tried contacting the HOA directly, hoping to reason with them and get the bogus violation notice rescinded. But to my dismay, I found that Karen had already been in touch, painting me as an uncooperative, negligent homeowner. The HOA president, an elderly man whom Karen had apparently charmed, refused to even hear my side of the story. Undeterred, I decided to take my case to the local news. Surely, a little media attention would shame Karen into backing off. But before I could even make the call, I discovered that my internet and cable service had mysteriously been cut off. When I called the provider, they informed me that there had been complaints about my disruptive behavior in the neighborhood. I stormed over to Karen's house, fully prepared to confront her, but she was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was greeted by a smug-looking older woman, her mother, as it turned out, who assured me that Karen was taking a much-needed vacation, and that I should mind my own business. Seething with frustration, I retreated to my house, feeling increasingly isolated and powerless. It was clear that Karen had mobilized the entire neighborhood against me, using her connections and influence to systematically undermine my every move. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the final blow came in the form of a thick envelope delivered to my doorstep. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA, informing me that I had 30 days to bring my property into compliance or face significant fines and potential legal action. The list of alleged violations was absurd, from the height of my grass to the color of my mailbox. I knew with absolute certainty that this was all Karen's doing, her petty revenge for the towing incident. As I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the ominous notice, a sense of hopelessness washed over me. How was I supposed to fight back against someone who had the entire neighborhood in her pocket? It seemed like no matter what I did, Karen always managed to stay one step ahead. With a heavy sigh, I buried my head in my hands, wondering if there was any way out of this mess. I couldn't let Karen win, but the more I resisted, the more it seemed she was determined to make my life a living hell. As the 30-day deadline loomed, I found myself in a state of near-constant anxiety. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to find another infuriating HOA notice or some new form of harassment from Karen. My once peaceful suburban existence had become a living nightmare, and I couldn't see a way out. I tried reasoning with Karen, confronting her, even appealing to the HOA, but nothing seemed to work. She was relentless in her pursuit of vengeance, and I was quickly running out of options. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at the violation notice, my wife, Emily, came up behind me and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Hey, you've been staring at that thing for hours. Why don't you take a break and come watch a movie with me?" she asked gently. I sighed heavily. "I can't, Em. I have to figure out how to fix this before the HOA comes after us with fines or worse." Emily pulled out the chair next to me and sat down, her brow furrowed with concern. "Honey, I know this is stressful, but you can't let it consume you. You need to take a step back and breathe." I shook my head. "I can't. Not when Karen is doing everything in her power to ruin us." "Well, have you considered fighting fire with fire?" Emily suggested. "I mean, if she's using the HOA to target you, maybe you need to start playing by their rules too." I frowned. What do you mean? I don't know. Maybe you could, I don't know, file some complaints of your own, she said, or dig up some dirt on Karen and use it against her. I stared at her, stunned. You want me to stoop to her level? That's not who I am, Em. I know, she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. But desperate times call for desperate measures, don't they? You've tried the high road, and it's only made things worse. Maybe it's time to get a little creative. I hesitated, mulling over her words. As much as I hated to admit it, she had a point. Karen was clearly willing to do whatever it took to get her way, and I couldn't keep playing by the rules if I wanted to have any chance of winning this fight. With a renewed sense of determination, I squared my shoulders and looked at Emily. Okay, I'm listening. What did you have in mind? Over the next few days, Emily and I worked tirelessly to devise a plan that would put Karen in her place once and for all. It was a delicate balancing act, as we had to be careful not to stoop to her level of underhanded tactics. The first step was gathering as much information as we could about Karen's past transgressions. We combed through old HOA records, scoured neighborhood gossip forums, and even enlisted the help of a private investigator. What we uncovered was a shocking pattern of abuse, from petty complaints about her neighbor's landscaping to outright fabrications used to leverage the HOA against anyone who dared to cross her. Armed with this damning evidence, we set our plan in motion. First, we filed a series of formal complaints with the HOA, citing numerous violations on Karen's own property, from an unpermitted addition to her home to a dilapidated fence that was clearly in need of repair. We made sure to dot every I and cross every T, knowing that the HOA would scrutinize our claims with a fine-toothed comb. Next, we reached out to the local news outlets, carefully crafting a story that highlighted Karen's history of neighborhood bullying and our own plight as the latest victims of her vindictive campaign. The journalists were immediately intrigued, sensing the potential for a juicy expose. As the media inquiries started flooding in, we could see the wheels turning in Karen's head. She must have realized that her carefully constructed web of deception was starting to unravel. Suddenly, the aggressive HOA notices targeting our property stopped, and the mysterious internet and cable outages magically resolved themselves. Then, one afternoon, Karen showed up on our doorstep, her usually impeccable makeup smudged and her designer clothes rumpled. "What do you want from me?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. "We want you to leave us alone, Karen," I said firmly. "And if you don't, we'll make sure the entire world knows what kind of person you really are." Karen's eyes widened in terror, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the vulnerable human beneath the facade of entitlement and cruelty. "Please," she begged, "I'll do anything. Just don't ruin me." I exchanged a glance with Emily, who nodded imperceptibly. "Then you'll start by issuing a public apology to the entire neighborhood," I said. "And you'll leave us alone from now on. Understand?" Karen nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. As she turned and shuffled back to her house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. We had won, and Karen had finally learned that her reign of terror was over. True to her word, Karen held a surprisingly sincere and contrite neighborhood meeting the following week, where she publicly apologized for her past behavior and vowed to be a more considerate and respectful member of the community. As she stood before the gathered crowd, her eyes downcast and her voice wavering, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. For all her bluster and entitlement, Karen was ultimately just a deeply insecure person who had used her wealth and influence to compensate for her own deep-seated fears and inadequacies. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in our neighborhood began to shift. The once strained relationships between neighbors gradually thawed, and a sense of camaraderie started to emerge. Karen, for her part, kept her promise and stayed out of our affairs, content to keep a low profile and avoid any further confrontations. As for my family, we quickly settled back into our normal routine, the threat of HOA fines and relentless harassment now firmly in the rearview mirror. Emily and I even hosted a neighborhood BBQ, where we were warmly welcomed by the once wary residents who had previously kept their distance. In the end, our victory over Karen was bittersweet. While we had emerged triumphant, the entire ordeal had left us feeling drained and disillusioned. We had been forced to stoop to her level, to fight fire with fire, in order to protect our home and our way of life. But as I surveyed the gathering of neighbors, laughing and chatting amicably, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We had reclaimed our community, and in doing so, we had learned a valuable lesson of the power of unity and the importance of standing up to bullies, no matter how formidable they may seem. Karen, for her part, seemed to have finally learned her own lesson. She kept to herself, no longer the neighborhood tyrant, but rather a humbled and chastened figure, a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked entitlement and abuse of power. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. The battle may have been won, but the war for a harmonious, respectful community was far from over. But for now, at least, peace had been restored to our little corner of the world.